Okay, we're a bit ahead of time, which is great.
Yep.
And I think we're live on YouTube now.
Oh, so is it my iPad, which is oh yeah, it says, yeah, live on YouTube. Okay, cool. Nice.
Sorry. Good, so we're live. And I'm just going to pause it here so it doesn't make noise on my end.
Great.
And great. So, Doug, it's a pleasure to have connected with you a few days ago only, right? I think I've known about your work for a while now, and it's exciting to be on. Hold on. Have a little thing to take care of here. My battery is about to die.
No worries.
Okay, devices. So in 3 minutes, we'll go live on Instagram. But yeah, I mean, it's nice to know that there's folks out there that that have such a similar mission, right? And I feel that that's kind of the key connector with you. And they feel that sometimes these problems we're wanting to tackle during this lifetime, I guess, and are so wicked and they're so complex that it can only be. You said something very nice. You sent me, and I'd definitely love to touch on that during the call, during the live. One of your answers to questions I sent you about creating ecosystem, right, that can propagate creative sustainable systems. That's what it's about, right? That's the only way is collaborating, right, and inspiring larger crowds, not just a centralized kind of approach.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, yeah, the whole the greater vision, or the first kind of revelation with Silo was considering nature, considering how in nature there is no waste. You think of a jungle and everything just lives and dies, and it's this web of life. And then humans have then created a non-natural material, or many non-natural materials, by synthesizing natural things together. And this is kind of breaking nature. This is this was not meant to be. This is an anomaly. You could call it a cancer. And it's just going back to nature, which is the solution of zero waste. And in nature, and you have these ecosystems where it's just this harmonious balance of life and death. And I consider that an inspiration and a model to develop Silo. And like one of the visions I have for the future is this Silo is this kind of zero waste mecca, this restaurant that people come to see it at its best, the full magnificent ecosystem that is Silo, as all of these supply chains and living ingredients and systems that all kind of interrelate or integrate, and then there's just no bin, and that's in a very urban space, and it's just that is Silo, and that is, I guess, my life's work thus far. But the kind of greater vision is then, if Silo is an ecosystem, how can that ecosystem interconnect with other ecosystems? And I think we're going to talk about it later, but there's this growing vision of applying those principles to a different audience. That whilst that is impressive, it's maybe appealing or accessible to very few people. So then how could we then create another ecosystem, a thing, whatever that may be, that appeals to a much broader audience? And then how can those two systems relate together? So you'll see a kind of pattern throughout so much of the chat the ideas with Silo is that it's this big web of life. Everything's connected, including information. So yeah, that's my thoughts on.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, we're on it. I think we're living without a doubt the most exciting times in the history of this planet, and definitely for human civilization. So yes. It feels important that we step up to our truths and to really kind of dreaming big, because maybe what is seeded during this century will actually become the norm, right? Like Auguste Escoffier came in 120 years ago, went to London, worked Ritz, and created the restaurant as we know it. And we still work in many places within that framework without questioning, like, wait a minute, Auguste Escoffier and Ritz were excited about the industrialization, and they were right. It was amazing, right? It was a huge transformation.
Sure.
But now we're like, wait a minute, this industrialization has its good sides, but then all these things are not right at all.
Absolutely.
So we're actually evolving what Escoffier and Ritz created. And I'm just talking about two kind of, let's say, game changers in the hospitality and food service industry, but there's so much more. So let me just let's keep this conversation, and we're going to jump on live on Instagram. So just to
make
sure.
My tea. I'll be back in 1 minute.
Go ahead.
Okay, ready.
Right. So I just want to make sure that for the sound quality, so your headphones are connected to your phone, right?
My phone, which is Instagram.
Okay, perfect. So now we're going to mute the our devices that are on Zoom, live streaming on YouTube. We're going to focus on sound on the other one. So hold on. Do not mute yourself on this device. Do not mute yourself there, otherwise YouTube doesn't get your sound. Just silence the device so you don't hear it.
Okay.
You don't hear me through it. You're gonna hear me through the phone on Instagram.
Turn the volume down.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so now I don't hear you there.
Right. And now I'm gonna go live on Instagram, and I'll see you there in a second. Okay, I'm going live on Insta now. See you there in a second.
Okay, yeah. Can you hear me? Oh, no.
Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Going to start this live with Doug McMaster, talking about zero waste food, zero waste cooking. There you are. Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I'm really good.
Well, thank you so much for accepting the invite to be on this live and to share some ideas and connect with the audience here on Instagram. Hey, everyone who's joining in. Hello, Nat. She's in London, one of the patrons who was also on the book club call.
Amazing.
Hello, Juano from Ecuador, Veronica. We have people from all over the world connecting right now.
So
we're also live. So we're live on Instagram on this device, and we're live on YouTube on this device. So if folks prefer watching us on YouTube, can go there. There's a bit of a better vision there. And also this live will be recorded, and we will keep it on IGTV and also on YouTube, so you can share it later. I think there's going to be a lot of juicy stuff being discussed on this one. So, Doug, I mean, we have a few questions and all that, but I want to start just talking about how we connected, right? We've kind of known each other's work for a bit now, and I think we've even circled similar communities. We have good friends in common, like Abby, who's working with wheat and seeds in London. We've known her for years, yeah, like you've been always in my mind one of the mavericks, one of the people who are actually moving the needle in food and being bold about integrity, right? Like the true integrity of ethical food and moving things forward. And I know it has been a rough journey, but that's what we're going to be talking about a bit today. But truly, lots of respect and admiration for your work.
I'd just like to return, the compliment. I have been aware of what you've been doing, and for some time, with great respect. And it's just a real kind of pleasure and honor to be talking to you today. So thank you so much for setting this up. And I could definitely see a synergy in a certain disruptive behavior that we both share. We do not kind of conform to the way things are. Instead, we choose to trust what's kind of bubbling up inside us, that instinct that leads us to certain conclusions, and a kind of naivety / fearlessness that, brings us to some original ideas. And it's just a pleasure to connect.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I do think that we're not just kind of going upstream against something, right? We're just following our intuition, like deeply, like doing what we love and what we believe through the different inspirations and currents of thought, right? Both from the culinary world, but I've seen you, really inspired by art, for instance, and as well as that's a big inspiration for me in terms of how to communicate much more and to be kind of almost subversive in a way, right?
For sure.
I used to be doing graffiti 10 years ago in Colombia, right? That was my, and we had a beautiful community in Bogota, and we would mix food and graffiti. So anyways, there's a bit of that aspect, I think that's very interesting to see in both of our work. So we have lots of things to talk about. We have a little agenda. First of all, we're going to start by hearing a bit more of your journey, and what you arriving to the present, kind of what you're up to now. We're going to respond to a few questions that we got from the Instagram post I did a couple days ago.
Questions,
and then we're also going to take a few questions here. I see there's people from India, from Japan. It's amazing. The kind of future, the plans that are coming. I know you're reopening your Silo in August, right? Silo London. You have this beautiful book out that is highly recommended for everyone. We just did a book club with my Patreon community, talking about Silo, the book. And so lots to talk about. So start. There we go. Start there. Tell us a bit of what your journey is. I mean, you go into depth into your journey with your book, but let's give us the 10-minute version of that.
Well, I am a classic school dropout. I'm not very good at being told what to do. As soon as somebody tells me what to do, I feel the need to rebel. And I'm quite dyslexic and also dyspraxic, so I wasn't good at the general educational system in the United Kingdom, and felt like a fish in the desert. It just wasn't my environment, and so I kind of fell out of school and into a kitchen, because a kitchen was the only place that would have me. Because
rebellious kids in the kitchen.
It's true. And you don't have to be qualified with anything to be in a kitchen. You just have to be willing to work extremely hard and work unsociable hours and not get paid very well, and extreme conditions. And I guess what else could I do other than work in a kitchen? And but because of being kind of labeled stupid at school, which is actually what happened. I had a real sort of, I don't know if you know the expression, a chip on your shoulder. It's like you've got a real sort of like problem with the way you've been treated. So you feel kind of motivated to prove those people wrong. And so I decided to send my curriculum CV to all of the best restaurants in the United Kingdom. I went straight to a 2 Michelin star restaurant, and I look back and think it was absolutely dreadful. I do not like the particular kind of cuisine that existed in that restaurant. However, it was quite good because it molded me to have particularly high standards, and it made me a real sort of, I don't know, a good worker. I became fast and efficient, and also, you know, it kind of got me on this kind of.
That's where we start.
Yeah, exactly, and learning those basics, and yeah, then went into kitchen after kitchen that was, you know, really, really high quality, and it just felt. It was always like, yeah, I'm on the right path, but the path seems treacherous, and this path doesn't. It's not good. This is not a good, you know, walk of life. But yet, you know, it was the only way I could go. You know, was forward, and eventually I worked for a restaurant in London called St. John, and that was a real game changer in my career.
It's a mecca of sorts, as you know, in a way that's kind of very authentic food, and kind of, you know, big portions, like very honest food, right? In a way, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what I connected to with St. John is, again, what we've already touched upon. Our kind of connection is like, you know, the owner, Fergus Henderson of St. John, was a chef, and kind of looked upon the industry around him and said, not sure about this, not sure about that. My instinct tells me to do this thing. And so had the courage to do that thing, which was very different to what everyone else was doing. So he's a very disruptive chef, though he would probably, you know, deny the term disruptive. He's a very polite kind of guy. And so St. John is one of the most unique originals in the world in terms of what restaurants stand out. And it has a philosophy, you know, it has an actual philosophy of restaurant. The place that serves food to people has a philosophy. And so I was working there as a 19 or 20-year-old, and was just like, wow. And it shifted something inside me. I certainly couldn't articulate it then, and maybe struggle to articulate it now. But definitely there was like a shift that I found this place that was cooking for a reason, or you know, they were living, they had a kind of purpose. And I found that quite a fulfilling notion. And it was, you know, I didn't know it then, but later on in life, I sort of, I guess, gravitated to something which was quite fulfilling to me, you know, which is Silo. You know, I feel like it's a meaningful project. It's way beyond, you know, a business that makes money. You know, it's certainly, it's so much more. So St. John was a real critical moment in my career, very formative, and yeah, and then I worked at St. John, and then had some
you had this moment. You had this moment I read in the book in Australia, right, where you find this place by another great inspiration, right, Juice Baker, and you find this place, and you're like, wait a minute, this is what restaurants can be. That is not the way I've learned so far. Tell us a bit about that kind of experience.
Yeah, so that was the kind of the next step from, you know, St. John was this incredible, like, game-changing moment. And then I went traveling and ended up in Australia, and met this artist called Joost Bakker, Dutch-born, but, you know, raised in Melbourne. I met him in Sydney, which was where this greenhouse pop-up. I urge anyone who's interested to Google Greenhouse by Joost, Joost. You'll see these spectacular images of a restaurant, on Sydney Harbour. You've got the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House, and then there's just this kind of punk building. You know, it's got these kind of graffiti inside the building, like kind of inscriptions of a madman, you know, like cave paintings inside, and then on the outside there's thousands of terracotta pots with wild strawberries growing from it, and you know, a rooftop garden with a beehive and cucumbers dangling over the edge. And it was just, you know, it was such a artistic expression of the future of nature within an industrial setting. And anyway, that would just blew my mind, absolutely blew my mind. And Joost was one of these true visionary geniuses. Like, he's a living, breathing genius. Like, there's I probably would say I've only met 2 or 3 geniuses in my life, and he was definitely one of them. And it was like he was from the future. He had this kind of thing about him, this aura, this like, how is he so brilliant? So it was him. Joost was the one that had this, you know, who had a building made of waste materials, which was at that point an expression of, you know, I guess human nature and the way we do or don't integrate with nature. And waste is a negative reality of a broken system. And he would express, you know, how we can live and integrate with nature in cities, in these urban environments. And then it's just kind of, this kind of conversation was very eruptive. You know, there was a lot of people very excited about what he was doing and what he was saying. And I happened to be there at the right time. And we just got on like a house on fire. And, you know, he was having so many of these philosophical and artistic and profound conversations, you know, about waste and sustainability. And this was in 2011. So, you know, this is nearly a decade ago. And
connected with these principles of sustainability, of a really kind of a more natural approach to cooking. And that was a major turning point in your philosophy, right? Yeah,
absolutely. And he had this kind of premonition, like, what if we didn't have a bin? And that was one of the more abstract moments of my life. And it's just like, sometimes, you know, we talk about art, it's these moments where there is abstraction. You know, it's like what you know kind of changes, you know, what you think, you know, it's like it's fundamentally changing in front of you, or at least in your mind, and it makes you see things that you have a greater or a fresh perspective. And thinking in that moment about not having a bin, it was the beginning. It was real sort of explosive, psychological, cognitive kind of awakening. That might sound a little bit over the top, but it really was like this kind of really intense moment of, oh my God, like, this is a better path. This is the path that I want to be taking, you know? And that was the beginning of Silo.
And so you started, when you came back to the UK, was it in 2014 that Silo Brighton started?
That's correct, yeah. So we spent a couple of years in Melbourne and then came back here.
Right. And so Brighton starts, and then that's where things get real, and you start doing this in the UK, working deeply with kind of local farmers, trying to figure out how to reuse the bottles, how to you know, do your own compost, how to do all these processes, right? So that guide you kind of, what, like in a couple of minutes, what was that experience of Silo Brighton? And then now you're, you know, you've opened in London. So what's kind of the biggest challenges there with Brighton?
Yeah. The best analogy that I can give of Silo Brighton is it's an idea in agriculture. So in agriculture, if you're a farmer, there's a thing called a land race. Now, a land race is where, hypothetically, you have a field in a particular environment and you have 100 different seeds. Now, you throw down 100 different seeds in this field. Now, what happens over the next year, you see the strongest survive. You see the 10 best seeds that grow and outcompete the other seeds. And so a year later, you take the best seeds, or in my case, ideas, and then you can then go on in the future and know what was the strongest, best ideas or seeds for that environment. And so likewise with Silo Brighton, I had this new environment, the new environment being this restaurant, whether it was Brighton or London or whatever. And I was kind of throwing different ideas at, you know, that restaurant in that point in time. And I was seeing what did work and what didn't work. And there was a hell of a lot of failure, you know, like 90% or 9 times out of 10, I would throw something down, an idea, and it would just fail. But then sometimes when it worked, it really worked. And then coming to London, it was like, okay, cool. I know now what ideas have succeeded, you know, what works and what doesn't work. And so that land race bore fruit, you know, it really showed me, it kind of like sifting for gold, you know, I found the gold eventually. And that's what the Silo book, or the Zero Waste Blueprint, was about that journey, that land race as a whole, to then 5 years later have this blueprint through that process.
Yeah. So something that is kind of compelling. So just for folks who maybe haven't learned about your work already, Silo is the world's first zero waste restaurant. Yeah. So what does that mean, and what is the challenge of, I mean, there's so many challenges, right? Like where to start. But the point is that you've made it happen, and it's a process, right? It's been a process, a journey of learning, of redefining things. I love the metaphor that you give with the kind of the farming, right, and agriculture, where you throw all the seeds and see what grows best, and then maybe take the seeds from that plant, which has a genetic expression, right, and a memory, and then put it back and then see which one, right, and there's kind of a natural selection happening within these systems thinking, really,
absolutely.
And biomimicry, right? But beyond that, so you're not only an amazing technician and flavor designer, let's say it, right, where you are creating beautiful dishes that are absolutely delicious, but also, right, so I don't think, and it's hard to understand what that takes, because in the end, a good restaurant often, it's already a challenge to just make the food good enough and interesting enough so you have people coming through the door. And not only you're doing that already, check, and you're creating kind of a delicious experience with an ecosystem of people that bring you incredible ingredients, but also you're defining kind of a blueprint. So you've developed this blueprint. So you right now you're working on developing it in the greater city, right, in London, where there is more market, right, because in the end, sustainability is also about financial sustainability and making things thrive, right? So tell us a bit about that journey now, opening Silo London.
Yeah, sure. So it's always easy to talk about, especially for me, to talk about the ideas and like the philosophies and, you know, these things. It's easy to gravitate to, but of course, none of this would mean anything if we were not a financially buoyant business. And that's been really difficult. I certainly I wouldn't call myself wealthy as a result of Silo. I didn't make much or any money in Brighton, but the fact that such a radical idea, restaurant, can survive for 5 years, you know, we must have been doing something right. And then obviously to open in London, and again, just like the idea of the land race, you know, testing ideas, you test what works financially, and we had to learn very quickly where we were wasting money, and how to then not waste it. And so, you know, I could talk for quite some time, but I'll keep it brief. But in restaurants, you have, let's say, 30% of your revenue, your income, is spent on rent and bills, and you know that's quite standard across the industry. It's like a rule of thumb, I guess. And then 30% is spent on staff, you know, wages, 30% on ingredients, like bottles of wine to sell, raw vegetables, etc. And then you hypothetically make 10% profit. Now, Silo is quite different in that our labor costs, you know, our staff, because of the concept, it goes way up. So we go to like 40 to 45% of our total revenue is spent on paying our staff, because we have more staff, because there is more to do. However, we offset that. There is a balance because the raw ingredients are significantly less. So a quick example is we don't buy any dairy products. We buy dairy, but not dairy products. So the cost of butter versus cream,
so you buy milk,
saves a lot of money.
Really good milk, straight from the farmer.
Yeah.
And then you transform it into all the different elements without wasting anything, right? I imagine you use all the resulting parts. Yeah, it's amazing. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so dairy is a great one because it's very circular, or it is in this example, in this ecosystem. So we buy two products, milk and cream, which are essentially from the same thing, but one is a fattier part of the product, and it's separated. And then you have two stainless steel pails, you know, those old school kind of pre-industrial kind of milk pails, and they're very efficient, very easy to clean. Stainless steel is a great material. And so we then take those products, zero waste, directly from the farm. And then if we want yogurt, we take the milk and we use a yogurt culture and add it to the yogurt, put it somewhere warm. The next day we have yogurt. If we want sour cream, we follow the same process with cream. If we want to make a ricotta, we make it from the milk. If we want any product of dairy, we make it from scratch. Now, the cost of milk and cream is just, it's almost not worth mentioning. It's so low. It's crazy. It should be a lot higher, to be completely honest.
Yeah.
But then, so it costs us next to nothing to buy that. And then it's the cost of labor to then make these things. But as a saving, we're not spending a lot of money on yogurt and creme fraiche and cheese and butter.
And the flavor, right? So you design your own flavors, and often those flavors are going to be better.
Yes, absolutely.
You can curate, because if you do your own yogurt, you can decide how thick you want it and how sour you want it, depending on the time. Right?
Yeah.
So there's more wisdom and practice into it, like truly.
Absolutely.
And then with that as well, there is no plastic involved in the little containers of butter, the little containers of yogurt. So there's a bunch of materials that do not need to even get in. So into the restaurants, and do not need it. So you bring in bulk and probably reusable containers, or and so it just makes so much sense. But then the kitchen itself is changed. Right, because you need more space to do these things, right? And this is where the labor cost comes higher, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just to touch on what you just said, it's kind of good to I guess understand that like Silo doesn't deal with waste. We just don't have it. It's a systemic like prevention. You know, we're preventing it from existing. So you can come into Silo and expect to see, I don't know, like something as a zero waste system, but there's actually not anything to see. It's kind of an anti-climax when you come and you're like, and then it's like just no bin, and it's like, where's the bin? And you're like looking around, there's no bin, and it is a kind of weird. It's kind of weird, but yeah. It's a system change where we prevent the waste from getting in, basically.
Yeah, that's it. It's so simple and at the same time so complex. But it is so simple. It is prevention, right? So I'm thinking about that as well, in terms of a system. And I guess here we're transitioning into the bigger kind of perspective of our work and kind of how we're envisioning this practice. And you're one of the world's leading examples. And I truly know it, feel it, and believe in it. But there's this idea that um, basically by changing what we understand as normal today in kitchens, in culinary schools, right? In education first, because that's kind of, we've been trained to waste a lot. I'm not sure if you had that in your culinary school. I had it. And I've even taught in culinary schools where it's just impossible to avoid. Like the system itself just doesn't consider waste, right? Just like our, I had a grandmother who lived through the Second World War. Maybe you had too, and they had to eat cat during the Second World War, so they wouldn't waste anything because they knew what hunger was. And our ancestors probably before the industrial era, which is just like our grandparents lived in a world where there was no refrigerator, where there was no food system as we know today. Everything moved at the speed of cows, right? If you wanted to move a food from one place to the other, speed of cows, not even
I like
horses,
that.
cows.
Yeah, I like that expression.
Because you would bring your food, whatever you're selling, maybe milk or cheese, with your cow, and then you would also sell the cow and then come back home. Right? That was the food system back then. It's just around the corner historically, and all the foods, all the flavors, the real kind of flavors that come with that. So basically, in a way, you're bringing that back in a modern way, in a more efficient way.
Absolutely, that's it. It's a I often describe silo as a pre-industrial food system, because that's what it is. That's that's the common denominator. That's the thing that's different about silo to any other restaurant. It's like, what it is that's unique is that it is a food system that would exist 200-300 years ago. Just the one you just described, that's exactly what it is. And you can taste the difference. It just tastes that much more alive. It's a very strange comment that we get again and again and again. People coming in and they have 6-course meal and then they leave and they say, I leave with more energy than I came. It's like,
wow.
and after a meal, you don't normally have that. You feel the opposite. You feel tired, and that's like, for me, it's an expression of like living food. Humans are living beings on a living earth, and Silo has a food system which is like, it's like nature turned up to like the maximum volume, because it comes from the best, most healthy, nutrient-dense soils and biodiversities, and then it comes in so fresh. It's not sat in a warehouse for 6 months. It's the day it comes in, we're like preparing it and serving it. The ingredients themselves haven't been processed. There's no bleaching. There's no, everything is as nature intended. And so our bodies respond so well to that living food. So there's so many different, it's just like a win-win-win-win-win kind of situation. It tastes better, it's more sustainable, it's cheaper. There's just so many great,
and nutrition. Like we're uncovering now that the ingredients actually lose nutrition. So a carrot is not equal in its vitamins and in its nutrients, vitamins in particular. If it's old carrot versus fresh carrot, right? And so we're starting just to uncover this thing, which just makes sense, but it hasn't been much research trying to understand, pre-industrial things, because most of the times industry pays for research. So why would they kind of fund things? Or
absolutely.
So it's interesting, but there's of course a lot of research that is going into that direction now. And I would even say that there's a bigger idea right here, that this pre-industrial food system is also the way maybe 1 billion people or 2 billion people still eat like that today. But because they are living, I'm thinking about Colombia, for example, that's a completely abundant country in terms of natural resources, biodiversity, even climate resilience, water, abundance. And there's still people starving, right? And there's still so much inequity, which stems from the disconnection to the practices and the community practices, right? The knowledge, the wisdom that nowadays, we're trying to remember. It's not that we're inventing something 100% new. Like this blueprint of the restaurant, as you put it in here, is, I feel it's part innovation, but part just remembering, right? It's remembering mixed with modern times, with internet, with of course a certain sense of aesthetics and a certain approach to combining these ingredients and using food as an art form, as a medium to communicate much more than just nutrients, inspiring people, educating people. So it's kind of remembering and adding that little nudge that is very much of the 21st century. So absolutely. Yeah, it's exciting.
Well, thank you so much. And, I'm glad you see it that way.
Yeah, for sure. And to be honest, like, so I decided to do the live here with you on this little kitchen that is just the beginning of the treehouse in the woods that I have just in front of the house where I live, my family's house. And I have this stove, wood stove, and I have this kind of water point, and I'm trying to think, it really inspired me when you said pre-industrial food system and no bin, because I was thinking like, am I going to have a bin here? And I'm like, it would make absolutely no sense if I have a bin here, right? And even the water, right? So the water here is going to go to a tube and it's going to go straight into the forest, like right here in front of me.
Nice.
What do I want to put right here in front of me? So we're going to create a hole, right? We're going to dig like a kind of the ancestral kind of way of sending water back into nature. But then what soap am I going to use there, right? If any, right? Just hot water. And we do have hot water, right? And so just hot water, in most cases, vinegar, and a few elements, but maybe some soap that would be made with ashes and fat, but very soft because it's going to go straight in front in the woods, right?
So back to nature.
So exactly, and that is how it works in cities too. It's just we don't see it, right? Or we're disconnected from that truth.
Yeah, exactly.
So, anyways,
absolutely.
In terms of the future, where do you see? I mean, I know these questions, and I get them as well, and it's just complicated. But I would like to hear from you of where do you see restaurants going in a way, especially now that we're facing a double, triple crisis at the moment with climate change, with the health crisis. Where do you see restaurants going in terms of how they operate and how and the service that we provide and the role that the restaurant plays in society? And it's a big one, but
it's I don't, I know where I want it to go, but I've been quite unsettled by the global pandemic, the sort of reaction, the amount of single-use plastic that has, I think early figures were like 10% of use of single-use plastic has been created because of the, and it's kind of arguably a necessary evil, but it's also changed people's attitudes again in the wrong direction. And I'm concerned that we are almost in need of a environmental disaster to truly force a reaction. Kind of at the point of no return, we're going to, take drastic action against environmentally what is going on. It's just our attention has just shifted away from zero waste for whatever reasons, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I'm hoping that people will just wake up one day and say, oh, it doesn't make sense to pollute this earth that feeds us. So let's stop polluting it with these non-natural materials and poisoning it, with chemicals and, fashion industry and all these different industries that are just toxic, literally. I would love if everyone woke up and said, oh yeah, let's do things right. However, I feel like it's going to take an environmental disaster like we've just seen, but for zero waste or for sustainability. I mean, the weather's getting pretty choppy at the minute, so maybe it's going to take some sort of crazy storm. I don't know.
Hopefully not. Fingers crossed. But so the work that we're doing, right? So we're trying to provide solutions for that. You're doing it brilliantly with working in a restaurant, working on a blueprint for operating, and you're inspiring people, right? And so because in the end, kind of, we can just wait for things not to work, because we're talking that this conversation, like, it's the 1% of the 1% that are doing it, right? It's like, so we need a mass awakening, right? So I truly believe in education, right? And I truly believe in entrepreneurship, like you're doing, and in that way also, in good business and good practice. So you mentioned the fashion industry, and I have a dear friend, Kavita Parmar, who works in sustainable fashion, and she's been advising big brands, but also doing like her own, brands that are incredibly beautiful. And she asked a question on the post, and I wanted to share it with you. So, and she asked you, so what do you think about growth, right? Yes. Growth, and I mean, thinking of the restaurant. So what's kind of your take on that?
So we see growth in the restaurant industry in the last sort of decade as this idea of coming up with a concept, or whatever you're doing, a restaurant, a cafe, a bar, finding a level of success within that model, and then scaling up, like scaling right up. But what happens is each one is like very homogeneous. It's like a carbon copy of the same thing. Now that is, you could say, a reflection of industrialism. That's what industrialism is, literally.
Copy paste.
Now, copy and paste. It unfortunately isn't how nature works. And when you find, the more industrialism breeds, the more nature dies. And that is literally like the exact reality of this copy and paste world. Now, that kind of growth I find deplorable, but I like. That doesn't mean growth isn't possible. But what I do like is this ecosystem idea. You think of a fungus growing, and populating different living organisms. I'm thinking of mycelium, but I like the idea of, for instance, consider silo an ecosystem, this restaurant, and I like the idea of the philosophies and the values that we have be to manifest in a different way, in a different place, with different people, independently, but they are at the same time still connected. They're connected by values, they're connected by information and principles, and kind of saying no to what we believe is the problem, plastic and pollution and industrialism. And I like that kind of growth. I think that, to me, is exciting, and that is reflective of nature. That's how nature populates. So that's my take on growth, good growth.
Yeah, right. And you also, you sent me something about this, which is, I'm going to read your words. So
please.
I love the idea of growth between collaboration and connection, right? Like an ecosystem, we can propagate creative, sustainable systems that can interconnect harmoniously. So you give the example of mycelia. This is how nature works. Yes. So it's basically creating good and not reproducing it and copy pasting and creating centralized growth, but rather copy pasting the model and working in numbers, right? Yeah. And multiplying a certain way of operating at a micro scale, right? This is kind of what I'm getting. And I think there's beautiful systems thinking wisdom in that approach to the future of restaurants. And I'm going to jump on another question, which is actually from Erika, that she's actually right here watching us from Brazil. She's a food writer, and she says, can these ideas become a kind of circular economy for gastronomy, right? That's kind of the idea, right? A circular economy of things of sorts.
I mean, if you think about what circular economy means, it's like going back to the analogy of in a jungle, everything lives and dies. There is this continuous feedback loop, circular loop. Everything is feeding back into another thing. That information, that matter is living and dying, and then feeding into the next circle, and next circle of life. And circular economy is exactly the same. in just economic language. And yeah, restaurants, that's, of course, I struggle to say that's going to happen. It has to happen eventually. I don't know when. Unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball. And depending on what day you get me, sometimes I'm quite optimistic and sometimes I'm quite pessimistic. But yes, that is definitely the way forward with restaurants, with bars, with everything. And I think like certain industries are way ahead, and I think that the food industry is way behind. Like farming, agriculture, way behind, which is like, hold on a minute, that's the bit that is nature. That's literally like nature, you know?
The nature that fuels directly human civilization every day. It's the energy plug.
Exactly. And it's just not circular. It's like crazy, you know, it's like these huge monocultures and like everything that's just non-natural and controlled by this capitalist system with greed as a kind of vector of change or lack of change. And so it's just totally perverse. But yeah, no, that's definitely what needs to happen. And I see the energy industry and like automotive, like what's happening in green renewable energy. Again, renewable, it's all circular. It's all the same thing said differently in a different industry. But yeah, green renewable energy is way ahead, which is great. You know, you've seen films. What's the that president of America that's an incredible activist for climate change? I forgot his name, but he made the
President
film.
Al Gore.
Yes, Al Gore. He, you know, has been campaigning successfully for a very long time, and he's had just like so many breakthroughs, and you know, it's attracted huge, you know, Hollywood like Leonardo DiCaprio, and so that they've been campaigning for climate change. We don't have that power for the food industry. And the agricultural industry, and you know, fashion is kind of, I don't know, I don't even think fashion industry, to be honest, but that industry is an example of like really way ahead. And that's what we need to happen for the food industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're working on it, right? So you are opening, you're trying, well, we're doing our part. You know, it's not like we're going to be, I'm going to change the world. No, like we're doing our part, right? I'm doing my work through, you know, social media, with the World Food Program, with Patreon community, with doing consultancies. You're kind of doing many things as well, writing a book, and having published a book, and also Silo London after this kind of, you know, few months having to be closed, is opening soon, and people are going to be able to go there and vote for a new system of restaurants, right? Going to eat at your restaurant. So tell us about that. When is it, the opening?
So we've still got another 6 weeks. I consciously don't want to contribute to a second spike in the coronavirus. That's what I'm concerned about. And obviously, some restaurants are under phenomenal pressure where they will literally have to close if they don't open this weekend, literally today. However, yeah, it's a huge risk. Opening is going to increase the chances exponentially. So it's a really scary thing, and it's very difficult to say what's right or wrong, but we're going to give it another 6 weeks, and we're going to, in 3 weeks, make a decision, you know, if we're going to then open in another 3 weeks, because we will then see the sort of level of coronavirus that exists again or not again in the UK. You know, we're going to see if there's a second spike and then react accordingly. I feel like it's the only responsible thing that we can do at this time.
Really cool. I have a question actually related to what Natalie just asked on the chat here. Nat is one of my patrons, who's a food technologist, and she's a big fan of your work as well. And she asks, is the silo system actually more resilient to be, you know, in the post-COVID kind of system that you're going to reopen? Is it going to be easier for Silo with the current, with what you've learned to reopen than for other restaurants, you think?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I would describe Silo as I don't know, it's like a force of nature. I have this weird like sense of like it is just meant to be. There's like, I don't know how we survived Brighton. Like it's some, you know, cosmic force, some sort of zero waste god is like protecting us, because the reality of how I ran that business, we should have failed. And like the fact that we keep being resilient in this way, it's kind of unexplainable. Like it is, yeah, yeah, it's remarkable. And so I have a feeling that yes, we are resilient in some way, although I can't put my finger on,
I
you
guess
know. Yeah.
I guess part of it is that the creativity that is required to do
Yeah.
food that is zero waste is higher, in my personal opinion, than the creativity that you have to just do something delicious within, you know, even a Michelin star type of kind of, you know, 3 Michelin star type of creativity is you know, it's very high. But I think that for zero waste, it's even deeper creativity, and I think
Yeah.
that signs off of many aspects, and a certain flexibility, like mindset that allows for more resilience in a way,
Yeah.
right? This is kind of how I see that aspect.
Mm.
There's another question here from Veronica, who's also a patron, and she's based in Edinburgh, and she
Oh,
asks,
amazing.
how do you think a chef should do campaign on climate change or zero hunger? What do you advise someone who wants to make some action? What do you think about kind of this activism, food activism aspect?
Well, maybe the really simple answer, but it's just like doing it. So it's so easy to talk and to procrastinate and to plan and to, but it's just like there's so few people that actually do. You know, it's like the bravery to sort of, yeah, step out of your front door. That's the hardest part. And you know, just do it, like really do it, and put your heart into it, and
Yeah.
you know, and let fate decide what is meant to be in that in that action. And then don't be disheartened if it doesn't go the way you thought, or it's harder than you thought, because it almost definitely will be harder than you think it will be.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I would bring a great reference. Yoda said, "There is no try, there is just do." Right, and
Yes.
it's you just have to move forward, right,
Yeah.
and make it happen, I guess, and be consistent, be kind of, you know, try to do the best we can with our abilities at
Yeah,
a
sure.
particular moment, right?
Yeah.
So final points, we're gonna kind of go to a close, and there's something that you just told me before we started, which I'm really excited about, because I get also a lot of questions from folks wanting to learn how to be more resilient and more creative with zero waste cooking,
Yeah.
right? And do you want to tell us the big news, or kind of the exciting news, or the kind of?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you
I'm
for
excited.
giving me that opportunity.
Yeah.
So a growing vision has always kind of been seeded in my mind, and it was knowing that Silo, the restaurant, is accessible to not a lot of people. You know, for one, it's a physical space that you have to go to in London. You know, not everyone lives in London in the world. So, you know, that's already quite limited. And then, you know, it's a fine dining restaurant. So the price point, again, becomes more inaccessible. And so, you know, it appeals to the few. You know, you said earlier the 1% of the 1%. Then there's all of the conceptual philosophical things. So we're cutting our, you know, audience down into quite the minority, and that's just the way it is. You know, it is a high concept. It's something that, you know, has a lot of philosophy and art involved. So, you know, so what I've been mindful of that and thinking to myself, well, how do I then flip the switch? How do I then apply the values to a mainstream audience, to the many, you know, from the few to the many? How do I do that with the same values, with no loss of integrity? And so, long story short, I had this idea for an online zero waste cooking school.
Yes.
And it's so it's called the Zero Waste Cooking School, which
Perfect.
I think is exactly what it says on the tin. And it's basically we're working on it and hoping to launch it in the next sort of 2 months. We're going to start
Amazing.
small. Unfortunately, no one's. It's a startup, and it's done off of my and my friends' back. There's no big investors, so it's just me and a bunch of ingredients and ideas and a camera, and but very carefully planned, very thoughtfully conceived. And it's going to be fun, and the vision is what's important, right? The idea is it doesn't have to have a big budget to change the world, and so that's what we're going to do. We're going to launch it in 6 to 8 weeks. It's going to be slow at the beginning. We'll try and put a video out every week, but again, with and it's, I don't do this for money, but as you know, Charles, you're much more than me, but at the very beginning of that sort of business or project, there's not a lot of income, and it's hard to make so much time, because we ourselves
have to put
need
a lot of
be...
heart into it. But then things start shaping. I think there's absolutely no doubt that a zero waste cooking school is needed, and that there's a lot of us, especially with COVID, where people were like, wait a minute, I'm at home, I need to, I'm not, there's uncertainty outside, I'm going to do the best I can with my resources at home. And I just read this article in The Guardian that came out yesterday or today, talking about all the things that are happening in food waste, but really kind of being, hey, we are awakening to the fact that, it's important. And you have the knowledge about this. There's a few of us that have been exploring this, so I find it super exciting that there's going to be a platform. What's the Instagram account for that?
So we're quite lucky that the web page, the Instagram, and the actual business itself is
free.
The Zero Waste Cooking School.
Zero Waste Cooking School.
Just
so it's
Zero
the
Waste
first and you're the only, and that's perfect. The one and only Zero Waste Cooking School. Well done.
Absolutely. But be patient with me, because there's a lot on my plate. There's a lot going on, and sure. It's a long game. It's not a short game. We're not looking to make huge progress with it in the first year, but hopefully there's enough value and quality within that material, that content, that then can explode in the years to come.
Absolutely. I do think that, and this is something I'm
Charles,
working on. Yeah, go ahead.
I definitely will be asking yourself to be part of it at many stages. So
Well, it would be an honor, brother, to co-create things. I think this is just, we met like kind of on the phone 10 days ago, right? So or 2 weeks. So I'm super excited that you're doing that, and I'm super happy, excited to support. But I think there's I have no doubt that in 5 years, in 10 years, it will become normal that we're teaching these basics of how not to throw away 20% of vegetables when we cook a freaking sauce, right? and that should be common knowledge, right? It's 20% of vegetables, sometimes more than that goes to waste. 45% of the food that goes to waste globally happens in our refrigerators. Wow. It's not the system, it's our refrigerators, right? This is like UN data. 8% of global carbon emissions, as you know, are food waste. It's the third biggest CO2 emitter after the US and China is food waste, right? So that's what we're up against. And the only solution that is not industrialized is education. And it's teaching. It's spreading the knowledge and spreading the good word. And there's a lot of satisfaction that comes with it. And Absolutely. So I'm excited for that.
I just want to say before we go that I'm seeing comments from all these amazing people, and I feel like you've created such an amazing tribe, and I'm just very fortunate to kind of bear witness to that tribe and all these amazing followers that you have. And I just want to thank them as well for for listening for this time, and just letting their minds open to this information, because that's my favorite quality in another human, is the willingness to see things differently. I think especially with everything that's going on in the world now, that value holds weight. It's really a really beautiful quality to open your mind, and be willing to change. And yeah,
absolutely. So grateful for this time that we got to share. Thank you for your time, your heart, the work that you're doing. Thanks everyone for being there. I see Chinara is there, and Katie and Nat, and Zero Waste Generations is there. So yeah, thank you all for showing up, for spending this time with us. And yeah, I look forward to more. Right, there's I'm planning just to come to London, just to come and meet you in person, socially distanced.
Brilliant.
Hopefully in August.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. All right, brother. Thank you so much. And
cheers.
Let's look forward for the next iteration.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Bye. Thank you so much, everybody. Right. Here on YouTube, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, this is, I think, the 5th or 6th episode of this food talk show. I'm having fun doing it. I'm alone in the woods here, but there's these devices that allow for this information to happen. So that's exciting. And yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for your time, and do send me questions if you have any. Post here on the YouTube live. Share the link if you think there's some kind of interesting wisdom that you've heard and that you want to share with your people. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe as well, so you get the updates when we do more of these. And have a good one.